9:30 as I'm saying these words, and we are on a live stream for about the next 25 minutes or so. We're going to be talking a little bit around some of the things that are troubling, concerning, frustrating, worrying business leaders, the sorts of things that are keeping a lot of people awake right now. And because it is a lot of people, it's possible that some of these things may even resonate with you. And I suppose that's really why we're getting together this morning to discuss them, and maybe even some different ways of thinking about these problems, and maybe even some solutions as well. Who knows? That's a big ask in 25 minutes, but we'll see what we can do. I'm sure we won't cover all the ground, and I'm sure there'll be people out there tearing their hair out and saying, why haven't you talked about this, whatever this is? So if that's the case, then there will be an opportunity at the end of today's session to be able to talk a little bit about how you can get in touch with us, and maybe even have like some one-to-one conversations if you would see value in doing that. And even maybe attend an event that Peter and I are going to be running, which by the way, just kind of gets me into, I suppose, introducing who we are. So my name's Matthew Dashby-Hughes. I'm from Sandler Training, and this morning I am with
Peter Harris from the Alternative Board in North Staffordshire.
Fantastic. That was slick. I even pointed in the right direction as well. That's very good, because you appear to be on my right, which means I have to point to my left. So there we go. Anyway, good stuff. So we're just prove this is live, and we haven't really rehearsed it very well, or at all, come to that. So Peter, why are we here, and what prompted us to be having this conversation this morning?
I think, Matthew, you were at a board meeting last month, and you asked the rest of us a question around, what, if you could wave a magic wand, what would it be at the moment that you would try to solve with it? And there were a number of things that came out. It wasn't just one thing, it was quite a list, but it was a fairly consistent list between everyone there, actually. Recruitment, inevitably, I think just at the moment, was on the list. I think staff expectations of what work is and their engagement with it, discretionary effort, and has that come from a hybrid, or is that a deeper change in people's work ethic given what's happened over the period of the pandemic? Wage inflation potentially related to that. I think there are a number of themes playing through. Another one was, do leaders need to lead differently? And if they do, what does that look like? I think, again, another thing coming out of all of that was maybe efficiency. And can you be more efficient, and how can you find the time to actually do that, ironically?
Absolutely, yeah. It's almost a chicken and egg thing, isn't it? But yes, you're absolutely right. In fact, putting my glasses on here and just having a quick look, these are my scrawled, handwritten notes from that meeting. As you can see, obviously nobody's going to be able to read them. A, because they're too small, and B, because if anybody can see my handwriting, it is bloody awful. But I can just about make it out. But yeah, there are some strange levels of, shall we say, congruence or coincidence between all of the things that people were saying. And I guess for a lot of business owners, it seems to start, doesn't it, with this whole thing around, I suppose, people. It's how do you find talent, and how do you retain talent? How do you get the best out of people, and how do you actually become an employer of choice when actually the expectations of work to some extent seem to be changing for a lot of people, and rightly so, actually, I think, personally. And that's an opinion rather than a fact, but actually the balance between employer and employee expectations seems to be almost the level. There's a leveling of the playing field to some extent. So what are your observations on that?
I think for me, Matthew, that leveling of the playing field piece is quite interesting. I think in a world where you've got the Great Resignation, and I think there is some truth to it, I don't think it's just myth, then you've got potentially a team who are having one eye to what else is out there more than they may have done in the past. I think their expectations, their view of the world have changed over the last 2 years. I think hybrid working, the ability to work from home, the focus that's brought to work-life balance. And you see it in other places, why has the housing market moved on the way it's moved on? And in some of the places it's moved to. It's because I think people want to be able to get out and about more, to enjoy themselves more. So all those long working hours that many people were putting in previously, they're seeing the world differently to that now. And, families become more important. Lots of people have found new interests during some of that, and they're wanting to enjoy those things more. So you've got kind of a culmination of all those things coming together. And I think it means two things. One, retaining people becomes really important. Having an environment people want to work in becomes really important. And being able to demonstrate that as well. And I think quite often that's a forgotten point. But I think that having that right environment, that is a really strong beginning in thinking about what it looks like. So to throw it back to you a little bit, Matthew, if you were in that space, and I know you've been there, what would you be looking for to get an environment in which a team would thrive?
Well, I think that's a really good question, and actually, the seeds of some of the answer are actually in what you just said, because that right environment speaks to a cultural thing, and really, it's about the way in which we lead, and to some extent, it's around finding out what really motivates people, what gets them out of bed in the morning. Because there's this, I used to hate it. Years ago, I had an ops director who reported to me, and he used to say that his job was to lead, motivate, and inspire, which sounds great, sounds brilliant, and brilliant so far. But there's one word in there that I really struggle with, which is motivate, used as a verb that you do to somebody. You can't actually motivate somebody else. Motivation's intrinsic, it's internal. You can inspire and you can lead. I like those two bits. But really, the inspiration is about, I suppose, finding out what really motivates somebody, what their internal motivations are, what the things they want to do, and can you align the achievement of their personal goals with the goals of the organization. When you do that, when you have a congruence between those two things, then you're into something where you can actually really start to motivate them and get something, because it's not something you do to them. But for me, it's a case of, you've got two pressures on businesses right now in some ways. You've got at one end, you've got the fact that actually there is this expectation of work where actually work-life balance has become a much bigger deal, and actually people are starting to see the benefits of that, and they're seeing some of the things that they can gain through hybrid working. But there's also some elements that they lose through it as well, which is the ability to onboard, to have those interactions with colleagues, maybe to feel truly integrated and truly culturally integrated within a business. There are some challenges there as well. And that work-life balance thing means at the other end, the business might possibly suffer from a reduction in what we call discretionary effort, which is where somebody is truly motivated, bought in, and really understands the needs of the organization, and actually takes them on as though they are their own as well, and they feel truly bought into it. And then they go the extra mile. They do the full 9 yards kind of thing. They go more than is necessarily in their job contract. And that sort of thing is where you see, real amazing kind of things coming out of a team, when people feel so invested personally in something. And I suppose it's how do we lead differently to be able to do what I just said, to be able to align somebody's personal goals, motivations, with the motivations of the organization, the goals of the organization. How do you do that when actually the workforce is disparate, when you've got a revolving door of talent because people are busy going out looking for other opportunities, when there is this great resignation, when there is a drain on talent? How do you do that? How do you even achieve it?
Right. Doesn't it start at home? So I think, as a business leader, have you got clarity of vision for yourself? Do you know what you want? And do you know what you want from your business or your role in leading whatever the team is? Where's it going to take you? Where's that work-life balance piece for you? What is that role supposed to be producing for you? And then and particularly if you're the business owner, is your business then set up and directed towards producing that? Have you got clarity around those two things, and those two things coming together? And actually then to the inspiring rather than motivating necessarily the team, but it might motivate them, because if you've got a clarity on that, if you can put that across, that starts to be something that's much more interesting to people. If they've got a level of interest in what you're putting across. And the best example in a way I've seen of it was probably working for quite a large business, actually a PLC. And they had a very clear view of where they wanted to go and inspired with people with what that meant. And putting across, this is the place we want to be in the world, and this is what we want to fulfill. And it wasn't necessarily about it was an engineering company, it wasn't about being the best engineers, all that kind of thing. It was, what impact are we going to have on the world? And I think that starts to get people a little bit more interested in, if you start having a conversation about, we want to help businesses achieve the things that they set out to do. In a lot of things, it's very broad, but you can narrow it down clearly. But if you start thinking about that in the context of what many of us are doing in business to business and how you're going to impact, then that's kind of a journey that people might want to come on more clearly than we're the best engineers, or we want to be the best engineers. They're already there because they're an engineer, but actually what are they going to get excited and motivated about, and what's going to be different about what you do?
I think that's a really, really good
Matthew,
yeah.
Again, be interested to hear your views on that, where you've taken that kind of thing in your experience.
Yeah, no, it is a very good point, and yeah, I was nodding, whether sagely or not, I don't know, but certainly I was nodding in violent agreement with you, because well, I mean, there's a really good cliched example of this, isn't there, where with the alignment with vision, which is that clarity piece. Which is the classic one of JFK, saying at the beginning of the 60s, by the end of the decade, we'll put a man on the moon, and then going around NASA a couple of years later and seeing a guy sweeping the floor. This is probably an apocryphal story, but it's still a great story because it shows this alignment thing. And he said, "What are you doing?" And instead of saying, "Well, I'm sweeping the floor, boss," Mr. President, sorry, he said, "Well, I'm helping put a man on the moon." Because that alignment, was right through the organization from top to bottom. That actually every little thing that we do, from sweeping the floor through to building computations through to whatever, was all aimed at this one thing, which is to achieve this one goal. And everybody felt totally aligned with that culturally, not just within the organization, but actually in the wider country in that particular example. And that's a terrific example. I suppose the question is more around the how side. And you said, what have I done in some of my experience? Well, I've done quite a lot of things, some of which has worked, some of which hasn't. Things that don't work is dare I say, assumption and mind reading. They got that cheesy old phrase that assume makes an ass out of you and me. Assumption is the mother of all screw ups, basically. And if you have ambiguity at the top, it tends to filter through into politics, infighting, and dysfunction throughout the rest of the organization. Because if you have lack of clarity, lack of shared understanding, lack of vision, then you end up typically with people actually pursuing their own agendas, whether intentionally or otherwise. You end up with dysfunction rather than diversity, and you end up with people who are just a little bit miserable being there, and it's a little bit of a problem. It can be a bit of a challenge. So what do we do about that? Well, managing is something you can't do en masse. You have to do it one-to-one. And for me, an absolutely critical element of this is for the manager to stop trying to do and to focus more on getting things done by empowering the people that they work with. And I don't just mean that in a cheesy, slightly hackneyed phrase, "Oh, we've got to empower our people." No, I really mean it. We really do. And how do you do that? Well, you do it by not so much telling them and being a directional kind of, you are basically a little clone of me. I need you to go and do that thing. You empower them by asking them questions, but helping them to take ownership of it, helping them to feel like it's theirs. And that's a much more nuanced thing and takes some real skill at actually coaching people in the moment more than just telling them what to do. Your thoughts on that?
My thoughts on that, I think you've hit on a really good point, Matthew. I think one of the best conversations I had in terms of a coaching sort of conversation with that was walking in to a meeting with my then boss with a view of something I wanted to do, explaining it all to him, going through it, and walking out of the room doing something completely different. And in a way, it sort of takes away, it may take away from what you're saying in a sense, but I don't think it does. I think it actually adds to it because it's about that coaching piece. Walking out of the room with a clear view of something totally different that I was going to do that I thought was completely my idea. And a lot of that had been in shape. And the feeling of empowerment from that was definitely there because sort of walked away with some really clear ideas and of what it was I was specifically, to your point, going to do to move some of the things I wanted to do forward. And limiting that down. And I think another conversation around the same time that was really interesting was to that coaching piece of it was another meeting at the same time with an MD who had quite a fearsome reputation. I'm walking in and sort of saying, well, I think all of these things we're not getting right and we need to change. And he kind of gave me the look and then said the prophetic words of, okay, convince me in 30 seconds. And it was fairly obvious that you were going to get bounced out of the room if you didn't do it.
Hmm.
And ultimately, at the end of that, it was kind of, well, these are the reasons why we're getting it wrong, and did manage to get those across in the 30 seconds. And was surprised that the response then was, yeah, absolutely get all of that. Now, you said you want to do 5 things. What I'd actually like you to do is 3 things really well. And let's talk through what those 3 things will be and why. And again, I'm leaving the room feeling, yeah, I get that. I'm empowered. I know what I'm going to go and do. And the other thing, actually, in a lot of ways about that empowerment, Matthew, is in both those cases, leaving the room, knowing that somebody was behind me, supporting me in those things.
That's a great point. That's a really good point. I like that. Yeah.
And I think, to a lot of the other things we've talked about, during that period, that was a great place to be. There was no thought, different world, different time, maybe. But for me, there was no thought at that point that that was an organisation I wanted to leave. I was enjoying it. It was fun. There was a lot of stuff to do. And I think about any of the roles I've done, to the whole recruitment and retention piece. If I see an organisation, certainly on the retention side, that I'm in and I'm enjoying it and I feel like I'm having an impact, that's great. I love that. That's fantastic.
Absolutely.
And I don't think that's changed, Matthew. I think for most people, that's still the same.
Now there's a funny thing, isn't there? It's almost like Homo sapiens first emerged sort of 150, 180,000 years ago, and we haven't fundamentally changed a whole lot. In fact, if you get a time machine, go back, give them a shave, a suit, and teach them basic English, they pretty much fit in if you could bring them back. So I think, ultimately, it doesn't matter really what changes in terms of technology and all those other things. We're still dealing with human beings, and we still have to be very human and humane in the way in which we are doing that. There's a couple of really great points just popped up here in the chat. We'll see if we can actually overlay the chat here. And actually, that's not working at all. Just proving that this is live. So there you go. But Danny is saying it's an interesting way to introduce yourself when networking too. When asked about, don't just say what you do, share your purpose or vision. And he says he loves the NASA example. And as a general point, he's also saying, to summarize what you and I have just been saying, probably at much greater length, do less, but better. I'm going to add to that, Danny. I'm going to say do less, but better on purpose. So add a certain level of intentionality to it as well, because I think that's a really critical point that actually is implicit in what Peter was just saying there about when you're bringing people into an organization, very often, and this is a mistake I've certainly made in the past in my early days, and I see it so often with business owners. They want to grow, so they feel they need capacity. And so capacity, they say, we need people. I need some little me clones. I need people who are going to do what I do. So they tend to, early doors, and I certainly was guilty of this, recruit in their own image, sometimes their own image, but weaker, if they're feeling a little threatened by employing people who are really good. But then as they get better and they get more self-confident, they get more comfortable with it, they actually start recruiting to their weaknesses, which is great. If you can't do something, or you can't do something, to a really high standard, find somebody who can and employ them and let them do it. That's a really good way of growing. And that's great. That's really positive. Whether you're outsourcing it or you're actually employing somebody to go on the payroll to do it, that's all brilliant. But it still tends to be the default that the first thing you look at is the people side of it. But that misses a fairly chunky thing, which really speaks to what it is you're recruiting them into. Because these people will typically have, your new hires will typically have experience, they'll have a background, and they may even have a track record of success. But that track record of success is based on being successful in an environment, which means that they're the people they worked with, the processes and the systems within which they worked, et cetera, et cetera. Is your business, is your organization set up with the processes, the systems, the culture, and the communication methodologies, the ability to actually interact in an open, trusting environment with absolute candor, the ability to actually share ideas and constructive feedback without it offending anybody, without it getting political or negative or dysfunctional? Is your business genuinely set up to be able to facilitate those things so that actually your new hire can be as successful as they possibly could and should be? Those are the big questions. So starting with people recruitment is probably the wrong thing to do. Start by looking in the mirror and saying, if I was being really honest, what's our culture? Really honest. What's our culture like? And if I'm really, really honest, the key processes that we've got, are they clear? Can people be managed those processes? Do those processes capture best practice? And does that best practice add value and minimize waste? Because that's critical when it comes to process. Your thoughts on that, Peter?
I think that's spot on, Matthew, because I think getting people who are interested, engaged with that kind of process is fundamental. And I think just yesterday talking to somebody, and they were talking somebody who's got making a real success of the business, growing it really well, and a lot of what they talked about was having all of those kind of things together. They were thinking about process. They've been very clear about how their product was put out to market, how it was produced for their clients, what were the stages were through that, how they would get paid for that as a process. So really, real clarity on those things so that everybody knows what it is the organisation, not just about, but also what it's doing, and those things follow through. And I think it was interesting because they sort of told me the story of their business and said, I employed somebody in the early days. And my next question was, are they still with you? And this is like 6-8 years later. And yes, they are. And I think that's testament to kind of that fact that one of the things they saw early on as they were going was, we need everybody to understand what we're about, how we do it, and how we get to the end point. And I asked them about recruitment, and whilst they do certainly have the same level of concern about finding new people as the rest of us, definitely they were in the space thinking, I feel fairly comfortable because I think my existing team is in a good space, that they're on board with what we're doing, and that actually in that recruitment market, as a result, I'm probably in a better space than I might otherwise be. And another recent conversation was almost in the opposite direction of, I'm out there doing loads of stuff for myself. And it was apparent in that conversation that actually that kind of process, that vision and transferring that vision through the team, both of what it is we're trying to achieve and how we're trying to get there, was not as well defined. So I think, really practical examples that I'm saying that when you get those things right and people are on board with it, that it really does make a difference, and it will make a difference in the marketplace that we're in at the moment.
That's very true. I remember years ago coaching one of my direct reports. And sometimes when you're coaching somebody and you recognize that as you're saying something to them, you think, actually, I'm really guilty of this myself. And you find out that you're learning just as much from the coaching process as they are. This was one of those examples. And I remember saying the words, look, management is more about getting things done than it is about doing things. And as I said those words, I thought, I've been so guilty of this over the years, so guilty of it, where actually, somebody comes to me and says, look, can you just help me with this? And I end up almost by default and through good intentions, taking it off them and doing it for them, rather than actually, empowering them to do it themselves and actually let them take ownership of it. And we end up in this situation of learned helplessness, don't we?
Yeah, exactly. That was going to be my question, Matthew. What do you end up with? Exactly that learned helplessness.
That's right.
And again, I've heard a couple of people in recent conversations sort of say, well, the team have not done it, so I've ended up stepping back in to do it myself. And I was like, well, isn't that becoming a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy? And you get a slightly quizzical look of what do you mean? It's like, well, we've been around that loop before on a previous occasion. You stepped in rather than saying, this is the standard I want, this is why it's important to me, this is why I want you to do it in this way, and therefore getting somebody motivated, interested, potentially excited to get on board and do that thing better. Another interesting thing, I agree with you in terms of almost it's recruit not in your own image, but in the image of people who think you can do things better than you.
Yeah.
But often you're not going to find them. That's the unicorn potentially. So when you are looking, sometimes you do have to accept a level of compromise. But think about that compromise, and if you've got somebody who's got the potential to grow, and are you giving them the opportunity to grow into the role? And if you're finding yourself going back around the loop, you've got a couple of questions. One, are they capable? Or two, possibly there should be another order. Is there an element of me about this? Depends on the individual and what the problem is, probably. Because
possibly, but I think for most leaders that are really super honest with themselves, actually, if there's a problem with a member of staff, then the problem is always a leadership problem, always, because either you hired them bad or they became bad on your watch. Either way, it's your problem.
And either way, you need to work it out quickly, because it's suboptimal for everybody.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So we're coming to the end of this, believe it or not. I mean, wow, boy, did that 25 minutes go incredibly quickly. So, I mean, for me, a couple of big takeaways for me is I love Danny's phrase of do less but better. And my build on that of do it on purpose. And I'm going to add another build on there because it's occurred to me, do it with humanity and kindness. So I think it really, the big things we're looking at here are culture. We're looking at process. And I suppose processes that adapt to the changing working environment, but most importantly, do so in congruence with the way that human beings actually work. So, ultimately, you've got to become an employer of choice, and it is a two-way process. If you want the employees of choice, the ones who actually are the ones who are those A players, or at least work within the acceptable levels of compromise against your ideal employee, if you like, for that particular role, then you're going to need to be an employer of choice as well, and recognize that it is more so than it ever has been before a two-way process. And your job is to help somebody to achieve their goals and their aspirations, and to actually be the best they can be, and to recognize their true internal motivators. And it's a tough gig being a leader, being a manager. It's also the most rewarding thing on the planet, in my personal view. But there you go. So, Peter, your big takeaways from today?
I think do less for better is a really good one. I think your point about humanity is almost the summary of what we were saying about how to get people engaged, how to get them inspired, and draw out their motivations to get them to be doing the things that you really need them to be doing and improve on. So I think it's thoughtful leadership for me, and intelligent leadership, and listening. Really listening, I think, is key to a lot of that.
Absolutely. Fantastic. And that is a great note to leave it on, because hopefully it's one that everybody will, no pun intended, but listen to, because the world will not be a worse place if everybody listens to each other a little more and listens to understand rather than simply to reply and have their chance to say something. I think that's a beautiful point on which to finish. Peter, how can people get hold of us? How can people get in touch with you? Have we got anything that's coming up that maybe they might be interested in coming along to?
We have an event on the 22nd of June, Matthew, which is all about how to thrive in the current environment and to build high-performing teams, which is in many ways where we've come from today. But it's an opportunity to have that conversation with other business leaders and to get a sense of what we both do. And hopefully we've given some of that today. In terms of getting in touch with me, certainly LinkedIn, send me a message on LinkedIn. You can reach me at pharris@thealternativeboard.co.uk. It's a little bit of a mouthful. So that's pharris@thealternativeboard.co.uk. And then you can give me a call on my mobile, 07931 760 460.
Fantastic. And similarly, I'm mdh@sandler.com, mdh@sandler.com. Nice and easy, because you don't want to be typing my whole name. My mobile is 07715 269 724. Always happy to have a conversation, quick chat on the phone. And as you say, we do have this event next week on the 22nd. And I'm guessing, being the highly efficient person that you are, Peter, you're going to drop the Eventbrite link to that in the comments below this post, whether that is on Facebook or YouTube or LinkedIn or any of the other places that this thing is being streamed to right now.
I can do that with you, yeah.
Absolutely fantastic. So with that in mind, it is now coming up on 12 o'clock. So have a great rest of the day, whatever you're doing, all of you. Be successful, and hopefully we've given you some value today. Thanks a lot. Cheers, Peter.
Thanks, Matthew.